Thank you for attending Salt the Cloud and Make It Rain. We are honored to be joined today by experts from both IDC and Optiv. Christina Richmond is a Program Vice President for IDC's Security Services Research Practice. In this role, she is responsible for IDC's worldwide research and analysis on enterprise and service provider security consulting and integration services. She provides insightful market analysis and actionable recommendations to clients worldwide. Also joining us is Drew Malone of Optiv. Trained in software development, raised in a data center, Drew has an eye for removing manual and redundant processes from enterprise and planetary scale computing systems. As the Director of Automation, he ensures that all of Optiv's solutions are secure by automating and orchestrating every aspect, from design to test to deployment and monitoring. When you automate security, everything is secure. To get things started today, I'll turn it over to Christina Richmond.
Hello, and thank you so much for joining us today. I am super excited to be presenting on this webinar with Drew and the Optiv team. I really look forward to this content and discussion that we're going to have. So we're talking about digital transformation, or what IDC calls DX, and how security breaks during the digital transformation. During this part of the presentation, Drew and I are going to tag team. He's going to jump in and have some conversation with me. We like to keep it conversational because who wants to listen to a talking head? And then I'll pass it off to Drew to present the Optiv part of this presentation, and I'm also going to interrupt and tag team with him to keep it lively and conversational. So let's go ahead and get started. So what do you mean by digital transformation? Well, you know, businesses are undergoing a huge change in how they approach their market, their customers, their supply chains, how they interact. It's fundamentally changing everything about their business, from operations and delivery, etc. At the 30,000-foot view, we believe that digital transformation, or DX, is a strategic business imperative at the enterprise level, and it's impacting all industries. And it's based on the third platform. So what is the third platform? First platform, compute era, was the mainframe compute era, just to give you some context. And the second platform is the client-server platform, or compute era. And this third platform is the always-on, always accessible from every device through every cloud platform that is based on cloud and analytics and mobile and social, or the CAMS stack is what some companies call it. We call it third platform. We don't think that digital transformation is a buzzword. We think it is becoming pervasive, and we think that there's going to be a tremendous impact. In fact, we know there's already being a tremendous impact on the IT infrastructure, and there's also an impact on security because of the change in IT infrastructure. Security breaks during this massive shift to this always on, always available, and located everywhere. But it's often an afterthought, or at least second or third in line during this digital transformation. And we're going to look at a few stats on this. It's also really to notice what some of the predictions are that we have around how this is going to impact the global economy. We think that DX is becoming more material already, and that it's increasingly core to enterprises. And we think that by the, we're already seeing it, I was going to say by the end of this year, but we're already seeing it, that revenue growth from information-based products is becoming twice that of the rest of the portfolio for about a third of the global 2,000 companies. And so it starts at the G2000 and trickles down. By 2020, we think a third of the CEOs and COOs of these companies will have spent at least 5 years in a tech leadership role, which means they're not going to come out necessarily from Harvard with an MBA or other business programs and become a COO and a CFO and a CEO, but they're going to come out of computer science. They're going to come out of programming and DevOps. They're going to be highly technical, and they're going to develop this kind of bilingual community, comfortable in both business and IT discussions. But this evolution is not just about language, it's also about a way of thinking and behaving. Within 2019, we think that worldwide spending on DX is going to reach $2.2 trillion, which is almost 60% larger than a couple of years ago. I mean, it's having a massive impact, and it is shifting the global economy as this happens. So in this slide, we'll look at the architecture we had for our IT infrastructure in the past and how it's changing. Legacy security operated under the, kind of castle and moat idea, where we lock down everything sensitive, the data, the users, the applications within a network castle, and we put a moat perimeter around it, or a firewall. And then we had our drawbridge, which served as access control. So back in those days, location was everything. But now location is insufficient in determining privilege and trust and access. So this is what our world looked like architecturally in the castle and moat days. PCs were connected to the LAN, and that went out to the internet, and this was the second platform, or client-server world. It was physically connected, and it was also Ethernet constrained. So then we dropped in the firewall, right? It could be a next-gen firewall, it could be a UTM, maybe we threw in some intrusion detection controls, and everything was centralized. It was centralized security, and life was good. And then we layered in still more security, URL filtering, etc. And it all worked because it was centralized, right? But then what happened? Then what happened is we started encountering problems when we introduced new environments into this legacy model. We started adding the PaaS and SaaS and IaaS services, for example. Things like Concur, which is SaaS, or Salesforce, or SAP, which is PaaS, and then Azure and Amazon, which are IaaS. The issue here is that our applications and our network resources and our data were no longer within the perimeter, but on the outside. Next, on top of that, we started bringing in private clouds. I know this graphic is a little kludgy. These little bubbles are supposed to be private clouds, and those are not necessarily on-premises or in the cloud, but somewhere in the middle, somewhere in a single tenant environment maintained by the service providers. So to further add complexity, we started allowing access to the network and the data and the applications outside the perimeter. So we had all these legacy network devices that are now outside, and they are accessing everything from everywhere, anytime, via any device. The result is that the network and the data and the applications can no longer be protected behind the perimeter. Drew, did you want to jump in and say something?
Please. Absolutely. So what Christina is making a good point on here is the one thing that's guaranteed here is change. Over time, your platforms are going to change. The location of your data center is going to change over time. And what's going to be really powerful is the ability from a technical perspective to be able to manage all of these ecosystems, all these products, endpoints, services with the same tool set. So instead of using one specialized tool to manage an Amazon cloud provider and another specialized setup for Azure, or even specialized systems for taking care of your network hardware, if you're able to take all of your favorite management tools and condense them into a single platform that the organization agrees on and everyone can all speak the same language, it brings in a lot of power there in terms of being vendor agnostic, in terms of being able to quickly add new capabilities or change your existing ones. I'll get to that in a little bit later, but wanted to point out here that it's easy to get confused and to get really just overwhelmed with the number of things that need to be managed. But we can really reduce our workload here by choosing the proper tool set.
You are so spot on. Yeah, you are so spot on, Drew, and thanks for jumping in. I mean, I think being vendor agnostic is a huge benefit, and I think folks are looking for one throat to choke, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go forward. Digital transformation by definition means we're broadening the attack surface. I mean, we're opening the Internet, but also we're going way beyond into layer 7 and applications and APIs. And the benefit here is that we need to be able to secure, you know, all of these devices, as you pointed out, all of the platforms, all of the private clouds. We also need security at the edge. And finding providers that can interoperate with each other is really difficult. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So where are folks today in this digital transformation? This next slide that I've pulled up talks about how folks are at different stages of their DX journey. And many are not that risk aware, right? So this is what we call a MaturityScape, and it looks at security and risk and compliance and where the companies plot today in their DX journey. Essentially what this slide is telling us is that the most mature companies in their digital transformation are including security. But that's only the top 17% of this study. So for the very top, the optimized digital disruptors, you know, cybersecurity and digital security are embedded in their business initiatives. The regulatory changes are factored in. They're including the CISO on their digital transformation team. But everybody else, the remainder of this population, or 83%, are somewhere below the maturity level of those digital disruptors, right? So it's, you know, security is not always included as we think through how we're going to embrace the cloud. Another thing that's happening is this shift from on-premises to cloud. And cloud is really the most massive shift that we've already been seeing over the last couple of years. You know, this data comes from a study that we did over a year ago, but it asks a question that has a 3-year period, making the data still relevant, I think, in today's discussion. In this global study, we talked to 1,000 respondents, and we asked them where they secure their architecture. Is it through the cloud? Is it on a hosted platform or via SaaS today? And where will they be in 2 or 3 years? So interestingly, roughly 25% kind of level set on securing their architecture through cloud and hosted and SaaS, kind of the emerging areas, the third platform areas, over all 3 years. So this, to me, means there's clear movement from about 25% of the population towards these emerging methods of securing their infrastructure. But then, if you look at the second to the last line of data where it says they will secure mostly through the on-premises methods, in year 3, the dark blue, this stat drops by 15%, which I think is really significant. Securing through the cloud and at the edge, either in a hosted environment such as a telco or a CDN or on a platform, is becoming of really significant importance. So just to drive this home a little bit more, I've included some stats on where we are today with cloud adoption. So this is from a more recent study that we did earlier this year, talking to about 400 individuals about cloud and AI adoption. We have seen a monumental shift during digital transformation to cloud. When we asked what percentage of apps are in these 6 areas, you know, whether it's non-cloud or private and hosted or it's public cloud, what's interesting here is we're seeing still there's a large chunk on the non-cloud, either off-premises or on-premises. That's about 36%, but almost, you know, it's ahead is this private cloud. We're seeing the adoption happening to cloud in the hosted and the private cloud first for the efficiencies and the cost savings, but also because folks don't know how to interoperate across multiple clouds, and we're going to talk about that. The SaaS and IaaS and PaaS models are about 21%. But when you look at the ideal state, so the question asked, what's your ideal state that you're trying to get to? You can see that non-cloud decreases, private cloud goes up just a smidge, and public cloud goes up a few points as well. So it's interesting to notice what's happening there, right? Customers are doing it all today. They haven't yet met their ideal state, and it's not just this shift, but it's the future that we see. The ideal state shows us we will be in a multi-cloud world. Customers will have many environments that they're going to have to manage. Sorry, jump in, Drew, please.
Yeah, sure, thanks. I just want to put a sharp point on that bottom right-hand, the blue box there. Cloud management is the glue for an increasingly complex application portfolio. Like Christina said, people are deploying all the things in all the places. You'll rarely find an organization that is a sole subscriber to a single cloud provider. Odds are they're going to be in, for example, they'll be in AWS, and they'll have some other infrastructure or services built out in Azure as well. So how do you manage that? Frankly, in my own personal experience, it's they kind of don't. That's usually where our teams have come in, is where they haven't been able to manage them properly. They've really struggled, and they need some assistance in creating that sort of glue code so that they can deploy their own in-house applications both to Amazon or to Rackspace or to Azure, and there's no difference in capability. They can choose their own provider wherever they want, and everything works the way that it should. This,
I love it.
Sort of
I love it.
Glue that keeps the internet together is going to be much more important very soon.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. It's really, you're stealing the thunder from one of our next slides, which I'd love to have you talk even more to, because that's exactly what's happening, is that companies are, maybe they're building it themselves, or maybe they're building it with a service provider, but ultimately they need help managing it, and they need help with the interoperability. So you are just dead on. It's, this multi-cloud thing is now a default state, right? It's the re-platforming of how we've built our architecture. And going forward, it's going to continue, and there's huge, huge implications, to your point, as we go forward.
They built these clouds. So they built these cloud platforms to be commodities. I remember years and years ago when the Amazon reInvent conference was still a novelty, and they had their director of cloud operations say that they want AWS to become a commodity, much like a utility. So people would be reselling AWS resources. All of these, an obvious example is going to be Netflix, right? Netflix, for the very large part, does not own data centers. They just have an enormous Amazon bill. And that's exactly what he was talking about when he said they want to use this cloud platform as a commodity. As a Netflix user, I'm a heavy user of Amazon AWS. I just don't even realize it. I don't care, frankly. I just need to know that some cloud is being used by Netflix.
Well, and also you don't care how it's achieved in terms of, the underpinnings of it, but you care that it works, that it runs. And one of the things we're seeing in this third platform DX-enabled world is make it run. Just make it run. I want to do my core business, which for Netflix is streaming movies and shows. I want to think about my core business, and I want to do it securely. But I don't want to have to think about, as a consumer of that, how the magic is happening on the back end. So Netflix is saying, just make it run, right?
Yep, people don't want shovels, they want a hole in the ground. I don't care how it happens, just make it happen.
I'm going to steal that. I like that.
Please do. I probably found it in a book somewhere.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So back to the point about multi-cloud, right? So this is a chart that talks about single cloud. Only 28% of the population that we talk to is still in one cloud. Most businesses, organizations are in multi-cloud. And the difference here between low interoperability and high interoperability is how well you can move workloads. So low interoperability might mean you've got your CRM system on a SaaS platform with Salesforce, and then you might have your HR program running on an AWS instance, and you then also have, some rack space for something else, and they don't talk to each other. You can't migrate your workloads easily, and the security is definitely not easy. The high interoperability is a bit of a misnomer, in my opinion. It means that there is an ability to get to each of those workloads in a highly scalable and interoperable way, but often, if you'll notice the right side of this chart, it's via hosted private cloud. So it's going through an AT&T NetBond or some kind of, way of connecting your multi-clouds in a seamless fashion to you, the user, and with security that you're spinning up through that, whether it's VPNing like NetBond or whatever that interface is, but it's not truly seamlessly moving workload and workload and workload and security across each of those. Now, hybrid is the panacea. It is the truly interoperable, truly seamless, facile way of doing business across multi-cloud, but it also does not necessarily include security all the time. So this whole universe of single and multi and hybrid is how we're moving as as an individual and as an organization to utilize cloud, but it's not necessarily easy and it's not necessarily secure. So this other set of data on the right-hand side, these connection points, is how we connect our applications. And as I pointed out, that 43 plus 39% is connecting through a hosted private cloud, a hosted entity, to get to our private or public cloud. Only 39% is going in that example that I used with AT&T. 29% are saying they're going on-premise from a private cloud to the public cloud, and 25%, and that's a small percentage, are going from cloud to cloud. So to Drew's point, it is not easy to manage this situation. And that brings us to our next point, which is the management. So this slide shows how critical service providers. To your point, Drew, service providers are super critical in the cloud world. Customers might build their multi-cloud themselves, which is that 32% down in the bottom left. They've built it themselves, they've stitched it all together, and now they're going to manage it themselves. But that means that there's a 70% of the universe that either hasn't built it themselves and they've gone to a company to build it for them, and or they've gone to a company that they need to have manage it for them. And so, again,
for what it's worth, I would even argue the point that that corner with the self-managed, self-built, it goes one of two ways. Either they're very well evolved, mature shops, and they've got everything under control and everything is good, or more often than not, they've created a Gordian knot for themselves. And we've certainly seen cases like that. So they're definitely, we could say lower on the list, but they're certainly not out of the question in terms of in need of service providers. We've certainly done some on-prem work as well.
No, I would totally agree with you on that, and thank you for making that point. And in addition to that, Drew, if you see the self-built provider managed, a lot of those people who have created the Gordian knot, to your point, and then moved up the stack to say, help, we built this, but now we've made a mess, and we really need your help in sorting it out and managing it going forward. The 36%, maybe it was provider built, and they've done a really, the provider's done a really brilliant job. And they've done such a brilliant job that the user, the organization, is saying, please continue, please manage this for me. It's interesting that only 12% are going to manage it themselves after the provider has built it. And so my argument there is, that's 80+% that are saying, all right, we're either going to do it ourselves, but we want a provider involved to some degree. And so I think, again, back to my point about how service providers are so incredibly critical during this move.
I agree.
So
I think the point is tons of opportunity.
Exactly, and wouldn't you also say that the integration and automation is critical, and that folks are looking for that one throat to choke?
Absolutely. That's, again, back to agreeing on the right platform and productizing your capability as a service provider the appropriate way. That way, it doesn't matter where they built it. They've got it on-prem, they've got it in a public cloud, they've got it across 3 public clouds. It doesn't matter. If you build your tool set the proper way, you can execute on your offerings with the same manner, the same reliability and predictability every time, without question. Definitely.
Yeah, 100% agree. So switching to security now, if we're looking at this cloud infrastructure, how much of the money is being spent on the actual infrastructure? And point in time today, only about 20% in building out the cloud is being spent on the infrastructure. I mean, 2, 3, 4 years ago, it was 70, 80%. But now the money on top of infrastructure is where the real stuff is happening today. SaaS and hosted applications, managed services, professional services. Security services is 21% of that pie. And managed services in general are 21%. And professional services to help you design and deploy your cloud architecture are 19%. So those are critical areas for organizations to pay attention to. And so we're going to drill down just a little bit. And we're going to look at the top application services that are being managed. And you can see on this next slide that security is king here. I mean, it's only 10 points ahead of the others, really. But 53% of top application services that are being managed, that's demanded by this cloud architecture, is in the security realm, right? So again, service providers are really critical in this arena, and managing those applications and making sure that there's seamless interoperability between the multi-clouds that we're seeing spin up is critical around the security angle, not just the management, but management is also critical. And then, just to finish out, my sort of heavier side of the conversation, although I'm going to definitely jump in and converse with Drew as we go forward. Applications are built, right? They're assembled. And they're utilizing billions of available libraries and frameworks and utilities. They're not created equal. 80 to 90% of modern apps are from assembled components, and only a small sliver is the original code, and all go bad over time, right? They age like milk, not like wine. I wish they aged like wine. And enterprises consume an average of almost 230,000 software components annually, of which 17,000 had a known security vulnerability. So this is why we're having this conversation today. I've teed it up. I've looked at how we're transforming our industry and our businesses. We're becoming more digital. And what happens when we digitize is we start to break security. Where is this move to cloud bringing security? It's bringing it to the door of service providers like Optiv. And to Drew, I'm teeing you up. You're the guy, the man, the feet on the street. I'm going to let you take it away from here and walk us through what you're seeing.
Much obliged. Thank you, Christina. So to move on from that, and not even move on, more of tee off of that, just Christina mentioned that applications are assembled from various components. There's definitely the downside that she went over when it comes to building your applications, is that you can't manage every single line of code. Certainly, most of the software out there was cobbled together, in some cases stitched, maybe duct taped in some other cases, together with a little bit of glue code. And it's a nice sort of a cheater's way forward for software development. But if you flip that and look at the other side of it, it can also be done in a responsible fashion when it comes to infrastructure management and secure deployment of the various services that we take care of here at Optiv Decision Lab. So I'll move on with a little bit of high-level description of what I mean when one of our workflows. So at a high level, we've got what everybody thinks of in an architecture sense when they think of DevOps, right? You've got a developer that pushes their code up to some repository that triggers a post hook over to your favorite technology platform where your various system and integration tests are run, put it all together, run it through a few stress tests, go ahead and deploy it, and everybody high fives all around, and we do this hundreds of times a day, except hardly anybody does this hundreds of times per day. If you're Netflix or if you're Etsy, maybe, but everybody else is, they're all working on it. They're getting there, slowly but surely. So in the vein of trying to find a common language, we'll go over a textbook definition of what DevOps is, which I'll invite you to read here, or feel free to just look it up on the Wikipedia page, which is exactly where this came from. I'll take a second here to also cover our thoughts on DevSecOps as well. So we have DevOps here, which aims to tear down the classic walls that are built up between development and operations. IT and software developers are always fighting. Software developers say it worked on my laptop. IT says we can't deploy that, it's going to destroy everything. So DevOps is really more of a philosophy, is more of a shared success model. So there's a lot less blame, there's a lot less, well, it worked for me. It should instead be, it worked on mine, but not yours. Let's see what happened. So that's our textbook definition. And what I want to move on to is what it means to me personally, in my experience, in running a few teams, being on several teams, and trying to help educate people, some more willing than others, is I think it can be captured in three biggest tenets. One is going to be your culture of shared goals, regardless of who's responsible for what. And a close second point on that is an absolute rejection of not my job. If anyone has ever, maybe you find yourself in a department store, right, and you need to find where the men's t-shirts are. So you go up to your local attendant and you say, I'm looking for a t-shirt, I got Christmas coming up, can you give me a hand? And they'll look at you and shrug and say, sorry, this is the ladies' dresses section, I can't help you. And they'll turn around and walk away. That is the complete opposite of what I mean when I say, not my job. The appropriate response to that is, well, this isn't my section, but let me go find you someone who can take care of you. And they'll go and find the appropriate person, they'll give you a hand. And that's what I mean by shared success.
I love that, Drew. Sorry to jump in. Yeah, I just love that because one of the things in studying DevSecOps that I've been learning quite a bit about recently is how much of a cultural shift it is and how it has to be decided upon and instilled from the top down. Because it is this cultural shift. You have to, instead of, you're running as fast as you can to get through the SDLC to make sure that you deliver your code and that it goes into production as quickly as you can, it's this shared kind of collaborative way of working where you want to make sure you are working in a sense that is helping each other, security and DevOps, work together. And I love the last part that you have on this slide as well, which is the relentless automation, and I'm sure you're going to speak to that. But I just wanted to say from the studies that I've been doing and some of the writing that I've done around DevSecOps that culture is absolutely the number one. And the number two is, get rid of the term not my job. 100% agree.
Absolutely. Thanks, Christina. And definitely, really the only difference between DevOps and DevSecOps is that communal outreach and saying IT and development are starting to get along. However, we still have a valid, legitimate need to be deploying these secure systems, to be deploying our applications in a secure manner. So once you've not mastered, but once DevOps is an accepted culture and philosophy in your organization, you still have to fold in your security organization as well. So now you have still this barrier to address between the two, which is, well, we've successfully deployed this application, it works on a planetary scale and the users love us. Why is there a problem? And so now you have a clash because security says, well, the problem is we were involved in a huge data breach and we're on the front page of CNN. And so now you have your friction, and this is what DevSecOps aims to do, is take the exact same culture of of a shared responsibility and ties in with the Relentless automation and says, let's get some input from the security people at the same time, and let's treat them the same way that we treat each other with this shared success. And again,
that is revolutionary, Drew. Right there, that is revolutionary. You are talking revolution. and the reason why, you and I have talked about this. When you had that slide with the life cycle, I had actually showed you a slide at some point where it had a stop at the end, right? And that was security stop. Go back to the beginning. You know, it's the mother may I of DevOps. It's, may I cross the line and put this into production? Oh, nope, stop. And security has been the obstacle, not the enabler. And so how do we make this shift, this cultural shift, and how do we relentlessly automate so that security is included through each of these steps so that we're ticking the box as we go along so that it doesn't just force a stop?
Definitely. And I think that's what they mean, Christina, when they say you need to consider security during the development and in the beginning of the various phases of the process, not considering it afterwards. Because now, yes, security becomes an obstacle at the end if you don't involve them early enough. Definitely. So a last little point on the textbook and philosophy. We've gone over a textbook definition and we've touched upon our interpretations. The biggest thing that we want you, dear viewer, to consider is what does it mean for you? Why are we all here? What are you hoping to get out of this? And just a couple of thoughts to consider. Why are you taking the time out to learn more about the various tooling and technology? We could talk a year off about that, of course. Do you have more of a cultural challenge to overcome? Do you need buy-in from leadership? Do you need buy-in from individual contributors? Sometimes that happens too. Do you have a feeling that things are fine now, but you need a change of direction some points in the near future? That's what we're all trying to figure out here. A couple of responses that I've seen personally to these questions are, I'm trying to sell a DevOps culture, or I'm trying to educate people on DevSecOps. Another one of my favorite responses is, I'm trying to reduce the amount of tedium in our shop so we can focus on the more valuable things. This is one of the direct outputs of Relentless automation. When you automate away the hard things, they cease being hard. Now you're not spending time on those things, and instead you can focus your effort on the bigger problems, which is going to be your organization's mission, whatever that is for you. The last one I'll hit on was someone would say, I want more visibility into my ecosystem. And what that means exactly is going to vary depending on the person and the organization. Do you want more visibility from a technical side? Do you want more visibility from a culture side? What is every team's personal values? How do they value downtime for a system? How much do they value your ability to frequently produce new releases? Can you have a faster release cycle? So what does that mean for you? It depends, right?
And I think, Drew, back to your point.
I'm going to let Christina. Yeah, go ahead, Christina.
Yeah, I think back to your point here on the last slide. This is where the rub is with cultural changes. I made a joke about this being revolutionary. It is a bit, but there's an outcome that is so critical, and you mentioned it on your last slide, which is with Relentless automation, you're freed up to focus on other things that may be more important. And you're walking in lockstep with your security brethren so that they're not stopping you and being an obstacle at the end. So that culture shift really is critical. And once you have the top-down initiative and buy-in and support and everybody has decided to go in this direction, proving it out through the Relentless automation is going to make the shop much more efficient and people much happier because then they can do what they really are meant to do.
Completely agree. Thanks, Christina. We'll step down that. We'll go ahead and pull that thread a little bit right now. And this is, we'll get just the slightest bit more technical here, which is how do you properly build your automation? So when you set out and you start building out your automation orchestration pipelines, your products, your processes, Something you find that's really, really powerful in automation is you get really good at stamping out a lot of the same things, upwards of thousands or hundreds of thousands of things, whether that's a load balancer, if it's an application farm, whatever it is. Putting together the automation to make a bunch of those things is really powerful when you get a first taste of it, because you start to understand the true value here. You're no longer involving humans to set up a development environment. It doesn't take downtime and 4 hours late into the night to do an upgrade of your data center. It doesn't take that anymore. So you get excited, but now it's easy to get carried away. The one thing that it's very easy to overlook is, well, they're all the exact same thing, which, yeah, that's the point, but a challenge of that is there's always the last mile. There's what I like to say is every job is a custom job. You've got, if you want to lean really hard into let's talk about the 80-20 principle, you can very easily automate away your 80% of a job, but upwards of the last 20%, you're going to find small, minor nuances in every space that's going to differ from another space. It could be as trivial as a different version of an API that you need to use, or they're locked into an older version of some on-premises software. Maybe they bought an appliance from a large monolithic vendor 10 years ago, and it's working just fine, thank you, and you still have to integrate with that. That goes solidly into the last mile of your automation. So that's going to be where it really starts to show that you've done your homework and you've struck a nice balance with how you're automating things and how you can make them interchangeable, which we'll get to in just a little bit. So like Christina mentioned just earlier, this is what happens when you don't build your orchestration, your automation in a nice, clean, modular fashion. This is what happens when you don't involve security early, is you have this sort of a bad hybrid of an iterative cycle and a waterfall cycle at the same time. We've got everything teed up. It works great in development. Can we roll it over to production? Oh, no, wait, we can't, because it violates some security principle that we need, right? So this is just putting a fine point on how important it is from a culture perspective to involve security sooner. And I know it's easy to say, well, you need to involve security sooner. That's really simple to say, but anybody who's had to interact with security, especially in a scenario like this, you can understand how combative, how confrontational those discussions can turn real quickly. And this is where a lot of your soft skills are going to come in handy. This is where it's important to not let the ego get in the way, and this is where you need to double down on what you've agreed is your shared success philosophy. Maybe security is being a little bit obstructionist right now, but you know what? That's what security does. If they didn't stop things occasionally, you would be on the front page of CNN, and now everybody has failed, not just security. So we'll circle back, and let's see how taking this DevSecOps culture, philosophy, mentality integrates well with striking a proper balance with building our automation and orchestration capabilities. So if we look at this little list here, we have, this is your hole in the ground. I don't care about your shovels. I don't care what they look like. I need these things done. I need secure scaffolding created. I need a virtual private data center. I need a VPC created in Amazon. I need internal subnets. I need external subnets. I need load balancers. I need security groups. I need to know that machines I put on my internal subnet cannot be reachable from the internet. I need to know that my bastion host works correctly. I need a level of assurance that I have configured this appropriately, that the only machines exposed to the internet are the ones that ought to be, and likewise for the various ports and etc. That's just going to be the scaffolding portion. Moving on to all the way down the stack, deploying the rest of the infrastructure if you're taking advantage of some serverless architectures, because remember, everything is an API endpoint at this point. And if you're using the same tool sets that we're using here in Optiv Decision Lab, if it's got an API endpoint, it can be automated. All the way down this, everything can be interchangeable. So let's see what this looks like. So we have in front of us a sort of a menu-driven approach to what we have. So on our team, we've doubled down on SelfDEC as a platform for managing all of these. We've, of course, made use of some of the other more popular tools, but what we've found through years and years and years of experience and usage is we can manage everything that we've ever deployed and created in Salt. We can deploy our scaffolding in whatever cloud provider of choice. We can deploy whatever technology is necessary. Like I said, if it has an API, it can be automated. So we have the ability to, in effect, trivialize the deployment of the technology. Because like I said, we want to get the technology out there so we can work on the bigger problems. We're not there to deploy a really cool Hadoop big data cluster. We're there to help you get some sense out of your data, and we're here to help you solve problems. So if we look at this menu sort of in front of us, we have just, let's pretend this is our entire cosmos of possibilities here. We can put it in Azure, we can put it in AWS, we can put it over in SoftLayer, wherever you need it to go. We've also automated all of these various technologies. Amazon Lambda, you need an Elastic Stack, you need Splunk, whatever it is you need, right? So we don't need to deploy all of the things. We need to come up with an intelligent arrangement of these technologies, which is exactly what one of our data lakes looks like. So I want to make a point to say the various components of these architectures are interchangeable. What you see with any given blueprint is just one possible exercise of this data lake. If you don't want to use Hadoop, you can use a different ecosystem for your data storage. If you don't need Elastic, you can find other ways of enriching your data. If you don't even need a queuing system, then you don't need Kafka. The point is, everything is interchangeable. And because we've chosen a single platform to do everything from, it's not difficult to easily orchestrate the replacement or the deployment of new technologies to service new capabilities.
And Drew, perhaps, sorry,
yeah, ahead,
perhaps
Christina.
You're going to describe this in a little bit more detail, but just so that I understand it correctly, and you guys have presented to me and I've learned a little bit about what you do, but I'm certainly no expert here on exactly how you do this. So is this relatively plug and play? Can you sort of easily design the architecture with your customers so that they can move these pieces around? And when you say easily, how is that accomplished and how quickly can that be done?
Yeah, good question, thanks. I'll invoke infrastructure as code is how we do this. So we don't necessarily have, we don't have a sort of Hollywood-style interface where we can easily slide around different things. Although I'll make a note of that and see if we can give it to one of our guys to come up with a nice prototyping system.
Love that. I love the infrastructure as code too. I mean, that's important to bring forward, to say that you do infrastructure as code, and that is where we're going. That is where the whole gamut is moving towards. So I'm glad that I asked you that question because I'd really like to understand how you do this. So that's great.
So am I. Thanks. And to put a point on that, it's I mean, for us, it's an of course kind of thing. So thanks for pointing that out. It's not always obvious to someone who doesn't live and breathe it every day. So for us, infrastructure as code is it's not as scary as it sounds. And in essence, it's human readable text files that describe what you need. So in my rambling example of a secure scaffolding system in Amazon, that manifests itself as easily readable text files that we, back here when we're doing our work, we will edit those, modify and arrange them, and they will we'll take those and feed those through Salt, and that will create all of our secure ecosystems for us. And for anybody who's listening who's a little more on the technical side, these are plain text YAML files. This is the most technical I'll get today, I promise. I am strongly of the opinion that JSON files were meant to be read by machines, and I think that if a human is editing a JSON file, then something has gone wrong with your procedures. We use a much more human-friendly format, and the reason for that is if it's easier for a human to read, that's going to reduce the chance for errors, which is going to save you a lot of time during your deployment and your development process. So that's as far technical as I'll go. But back to our infrastructure as code philosophy, it means that we treat your architecture as a software project. We keep it under source control. We happily share those details with you, and you have input into that as well. So it's easy for you to see at a glance what your ecosystem is going to look like. And if it's too small, it's trivial to scale it up. It's just a few more lines inside that text file. Or you just change a number in a text file. If it's too big, we can scale that down as well. So this is where the last 20% comes in. This is the last mile, per se, of our delivery of, in this case, a data lake. So what you have is we have the power and the flexibility of a fully orchestrated solution, but we get the customized flexibility of a bespoke custom system to make sure that it fits your needs and whatever it is that you need specifically for you. And like Christina had said a little bit earlier, the real power of this is that it's vendor agnostic. There's real value in CloudFormation templates, and Azure's version of that is going to be your deployment templates. There is real value in that, and they're very useful for taking snapshots and quickly creating ecosystems in their respective cloud environments. The downfall of that is if you need to pivot and you need to go into a different provider, or even for whatever reason, you need to pull back and go on-prem, all of that time spent making your CloudFormation scripts, all of that time spent making your Azure deployment templates is basically a wash. You don't have any more tangible work coming out of that. You have to reinvent the entire architecture because you're changing platforms. So when you stay vendor agnostic, you can pick up your entire architecture and re-implement it in a different place with little to no extra effort. That's why we're able to say, we can deploy your solution wherever you need it. If there's an API, we can put it there. So this tees really well into the long tail of maintenance. And this is, just like any software lifecycle, there's always going to be the maintenance. To pull from the software development lore and a little bit of Unix philosophy, it's you want to write your software as if the person who's maintaining it is a psychopath that knows where you sleep. So it's fun to say, but the point is, maintenance is the largest cost of any project whatsoever, be it a large Hadoop ecosystem, a data lake, or just a small software project. You will spend more time, you will spend more resources on maintenance than you will in the development and the launch. So it's really important to keep that in mind. And this is why we don't build monoliths. This is why we keep everything interchangeable, we keep everything compatible, a bunch of loosely coupled, easily rearranged parts. And the value in that is it reduces the amount of load, the amount of effort it takes to maintain these systems in the long run. So where does this come in for opportunities for us? Well, when you do the hard things often, they stop being hard. So now we can take care of these hard things. Build me a data lake with hundreds of nodes. That's done. That's easy. We got that solved. Now we can focus on the hard things. We can work on securely deploying your software applications into wherever you need them to be. We can work on securely scaling up those applications. And again, because we're using infrastructure as code, it's already secure. There is no turnaround and now let's lock it down. There's no such phase. Because we've coded it up properly, it's secure out of the box. All of the appropriate access controls are already there. And even if you need to deploy a development environment, this exact concept holds. So if you need to see how your application behaves when you deploy it into your secure environment, that's easy to do. We've already codified it. Give us an hour, but we're going to create a new dev environment for you. We're going to deploy your application into there, and you can observe. You can see what it looks like. So it's difficult to put a value on agility, but having that ability to say, I need to see what this application looks like. I just made a code change, but it lives in a very complex ecosystem. The ability to do that and not have to share that dev environment with everybody else has a lot of power. because if something goes wrong, you know it was your code. It's your own personal dev environment, so you're not sharing it with anybody, so you know that something went wrong. And now you can quickly triage and find out what happened with your application. So we'll walk through another, a higher level example this time. I promise less technical, fewer technical details this time. We'll walk through an example at a high level of what we mean when you have a single platform for managing all of your orchestration and automation. You have your core needs from your system is going to be, like I said, infrastructure as code. Security is already coded into it, so security comes out of the box. For your data lake, you're going to need some sort of an ingest. You have a bunch of appliance SIMs, or you have a bunch of forwarding agents put in somewhere. We can automatically wire those in for you in ingest and storage. Management is going to be taken care of as well. That's our auto deployment of, say, a Hadoop cluster to take care of that. We have a catalog of analytics that we use. In working with our various customers, we work with customers in a large spectrum of domains, everything from media to healthcare to everything in between. The fact of the matter is everybody has data, so that's nothing new. So a lot of customers will think that they're unique because they have some problems that are unique to their domain. And while they're not wrong, the reality is they have a lot of data and they need to make some sense out of it. So we've noticed a lot of these commonalities, and we found a lot of common denominators. So we're able to maintain this catalog of analytics that we have, and we can run this across your data to help quickly get some insights out of it. So in the same way that we've automated the creation of your data lake, we can do that really quickly, and it's out of the way. In that same manner, we've taken that same approach with our analytics. We've doubled down on that. We've already taken care of it ahead of time. Let's get up and running and let's get some answers now instead of having to develop a solution a little bit later. And likewise with the consumption, and we also maintain a library of various visualizations that we use to help you make sense of it. We have dashboards, we have auditing report templates, and etc. And just in case that the stock library isn't sufficient, we have been known to come up with customized dashboards, because as much as I'll say everybody has common problems, I'll also acknowledge some places do have truly unique needs. So we can absolutely put together something that's a little bit more custom for you. And of course, at the end of the day, again, we're not here to build a cool technical system. We're here to take action. We're here to solve problems. So we can do this in whatever provider you need. We can put it on an on-prem virtualization farm, in a cloud provider, whatever it is, we take care of all of this with our orchestration and automation. And this is the sort of capstone over our big data lake implementation.
You know, that is a really wonderful layperson-friendly diagram of exactly what you do at Optiv Decision Labs. It's really helpful to see it laid out in that way, and how it is not monolithic. It's almost Legos that you can create one by one for your customers and then stack them together to create the final life cycle approach that you have, which I think is just terrific. So I'm glad to have that further described on this webinar.
Thanks, Christina. So to tie this all together, from our side, from here, us at Optiv Decision Lab, we take DevOps seriously, and we don't mean that as a, we've all read the book, we all hug at the end of the day. We really take this to heart. It is a real philosophy. It is a real shared culture of success. There's no finger pointing. There's no blaming. There's plenty of healthy retrospectives where we simply identify what went wrong, what can we do about it so that it doesn't happen in the future. Let's dedicate some time to make sure it doesn't happen again. So this is what we mean when we say values. We value the ability to quickly roll out automatically roll out a solution that is both powerfully automated, and still customized for your needs. So with those values, that gives us the ability to make our decisions where we say, we would much rather have some capability over another. So it allows us to lean on more of our values and philosophy when it comes time to write what particular lines of code, what modules to write, and what capabilities to put together. So that takes care of it from over on my side, the Optiv Decision Lab side. I want to take it over to Christina to make sure that if she has any closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Drew. This was really fun, and I learned some things along the way, particularly where you showed the two boxes with the different cloud structures, the different tools that are used, and how you can, drop in things that are relevant to each customer within your data lake so that it becomes more of a plug-and-play opportunity. It may be infrastructure as code rather than that sort of Hollywood interface that we talked about, but in a way that's really important because you need the customization. You need the humans involved. We're not yet to the point where bots can deliver this. So you need the custom human engagement to be able to set up the architecture for your customers so that they can run efficiently. And do you also at Decision Labs work with the cultural shift? Do you help your customers make that cultural shift as well?
Yeah, we absolutely do. Fortunately, for the most part, a lot of our customers have bought into the philosophy, and to varying degrees, right? Some of them believe it but are still struggling with how to execute it properly. And we're always happy to help with that because it's much easier to succeed with a willing enabler than it is with someone who's a little more obstructionist.
Exactly. That's a great point. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, and we're going to hand it back to Amy to wrap it up. And thank you so much, Drew. I really enjoyed presenting with you, and thank you to the audience for listening in today.
Likewise. Thank you, Christina, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Christina and Drew. So we will now begin the Q&A portion of the webinar. Please submit your questions through the Q&A widget on your screen. If we're unable to answer all of the submitted questions in the remaining time, then we will follow up by email. So the first question that we have is, what happens to security as companies move off-prem and towards multi-cloud?
I'll take that one, Amy. Thanks so much. And thanks again, everyone. It was really fun to present with Drew, and I appreciate Optiv giving us this opportunity. And thanks to everyone listening in. Security, we don't have final answers with security, even if we're completely locked down under that castle and moat structure that we talked about earlier on. Security is challenging because it's complex. We have a lot of vendors in each of our environments. Some companies only have 10 to 15. Many large enterprises have over 100 security vendors in their architecture. So it's complex to begin with, but then when you start moving the cheese, if you will, when you start having every device access data from anywhere at any time through multiple clouds or multi-cloud, security breaks. It introduces vulnerabilities as data in motion and data at rest is placed into new environments that have not necessarily been looked at to make sure that they're not creating vulnerabilities. And I'm sure Drew will have an answer to this in terms of DevOps and vulnerabilities that are created in code. But even just the old legacy firewall situation, now we have not just next-gen firewall, but we have WAF as well to deal with the web application sphere. So the complication comes both on-premise and in multi-cloud, but the more environments to which and from which you have data migrating, and you haven't considered those holes that are being created in the security landscape, security breaks. Drew, do you have anything to add there in the code sphere?
Definitely. And I apologize for the sound earlier. I've got a different setup here. Hopefully it's working out a little bit better. Like Christina had mentioned, when it comes to the code, it still comes down to automating everything. And once again, if you find any vulnerabilities in your products or in your architecture, if you've codified everything and if you've made it easy to quickly deploy a new version of the product in question, that gives you the ability to get your new version out into the wild and get rid of your older, more vulnerable version. And just like with a software product, the same applies for an architecture as well in a cloud environment. It's infrastructure as code, and just treat it like a proper software project, and you get to enjoy the same benefits.
Great, thank you. The second question that we have is, can we really interoperate across multi-cloud when it comes to DevOps? And how does that work?
Yeah, fair enough. I'll take that one. The short answer is going to be yes. At a high level, the key value is to keep your tool set platform agnostic. So in the same way that I was mentioning earlier how we've doubled down on SelfDEC and we can build out everything with that, when you do this, you sort of automatically create this abstraction layer. And so long as everybody in the organization speaks the same language and agrees on the same tool set, you can deploy the same architecture, the same product into different environments, even onto on-prem of VMware Farm or in any public cloud provider as well. And the reason this works, another key part of this rather, in order for this to work so well is much in the same way that in order to be successful, your classical IT organization has to be an internally owned organization. For anybody who's familiar with the Phoenix project, I'll put it to the audience that 0 organizations have successfully outsourced their IT operations. I think they're all in various stages of this process where they realize it's a bad idea. In very much the same way that your IT has to be an internal organization, your toolset has to be the same way too. You, of course, can share different platforms and you can use and purchase shared tool sets and other open source projects. But at the end of the day, whatever it is that you build and that you use every day is going to be uniquely yours. And that carries with it a little bit of a penalty in terms of labor and care and maintenance. But the upshot of that is it belongs to you. So you are very familiar with its operations, and you have the most power to update that tool set and to keep it in check with any updating technologies. The alternative to that being you purchase everything, and if you need a new feature, you have to wait for the vendor to implement it, and you can't influence how quickly those features come out. I'll look over Christina just in case she's got anything else to add to this.
No, I think you captured it. Thank you so much, Drew. I think you captured the specifics to that question. Amy, were there any other questions that we need to address before we wrap up?
It looks like that's everything. So thank you so much, Christina and Drew. Again, we really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who joined. This concludes today's webinar. We hope that you enjoyed the presentations, and a follow-up email will be sent to you shortly, which will include links to review the webinar on demand and also download the resources and assets that were provided. Please feel free to reach out to us should you have any follow-up questions, and we hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.